You're listening to the Full and Thriving Podcast, a place where courageous women come to break free from food obsession, heal their relationship with their body, and strive to live a life that's present, lighthearted, and meaningful. If you're listening, my wish is that this podcast serves as a catalyst that inspires you to nourish your body, nurture your mind, and energize your spirit. I'm your host, Meg McCabe, a certified life coach and eating disorder recovery coach with a PhD in having a good time. Just kidding about that last part. Anyway, thank you so much for listening and enjoy the show. Today's guest is Mia Findlay. Mia is a CCI certified eating disorder recovery coach and content creator. She is the owner of Beyond Body Coaching and host of her popular YouTube channel, What Mia Did Next. She's been a powerful voice in the recovery space for over a decade. If you are a fan of Mia's, I highly encourage you to join the Recovery Collective before doors close on June 1st, because she will be hosting a private workshop inside the community this summer. During this episode, Mia and I had a great discussion about red flags and what it was like for both of us to ignore red flags during our eating disorders, and how being able to spot these red flags and get treatment early can be an absolute game changer. I know that you're going to love this episode of the show because Mia is simply amazing. So without further ado, here's this episode with Mia Findlay. Hello, Mia. How are you?
I am good. I'm very happy to see your face again and to be joining your audience. It's been a little while.
I know. I'm so happy to see your face too. It's always amazing when we get a chance to connect. And I know that you haven't been on this show since June 2020, and the world was very different back then. You were actually on episode 4. So you were one of the first guests I had. Can you believe how long? This is now, I think you're now episode 110 or something like that.
That's a huge achievement when you can get over like that 100 mark of anything and still be sticking with it. So that's awesome. Yeah, the last time we were talking to each other, it was like month 3 or 4 of COVID, which is wild. So I think we were saying before we started recording, 2020 crawled, so did 2021, and now time just feels like it's flying. So yeah, it's good to see you on the other side of that for sure.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It was so crazy too, because during that time, actually, I was working with a business coach and we were looking for people in the eating disorder recovery space to collaborate. And I had an email written to introduce myself to you. And then the night before I was going to reach out, you messaged me on Instagram because you saw I was a CCI coach. And I could not believe the coincidence. Did you not know this story?
Yeah. No, I forgot. I have a terrible memory. Did I really?
Yes, it was wild. I was like, did I email Mia yet? And I looked and like, I hadn't messaged you yet. I had an email crafted, ready to go.
That is amazing.
Yes, because I had put CCI coach in my profile, and I think I had started maybe interacting with your page because I knew I was going to like introduce myself and try to collaborate.
Yeah.
When you reached out to me, it was like extreme synchronicity.
I must have really liked you because I don't do that. That's amazing. That's amazing. I must have looked at your profile and been like, I like this chick. That's so cool. Okay, great. Well, that's really serendipitous. We were meant to be in each other's lives for sure.
It was really cool. And it was during lockdown, and I recorded that first episode in a bathroom with what I thought had good acoustics. So things have definitely changed.
It took me 4.5 years to get one of these, with people being like, Mia, I love your videos, but I watch them with captions on because I can't listen to the terrible audio quality. So I get it. We all have to kind of like figure these things out as we go along.
Oh my gosh. Well, again, it's so great to have you back. I've been so excited to chat with you. And today we are going to be talking about eating disorder red flags. But before we dive into that, do you have any updates about what you've been up to in the past 2 years since you've last been on the show?
What haven't I been up to, Meg McKay? I've moved 800 times and I'm now living in a really peaceful, beautiful apartment in Sydney, which is the first time I've like permanently been back since all our worlds got turned on their head, and so happy to be back in my city. The business, so the last time I spoke to you, I think would have been even pre me expanding the business at all. I think it was just still a solo thing. So ever since then, we've hired 6 coaches. So there's now 7 coaches in the practice. We've got 2 in Dubai, 1 in Belgium, our wonderful AC, your AC, my AC, AC, the amazing. Romy in Germany. We've just brought on Jenny in America, and one of my former clients, Holly, up in Byron Bay in Australia. The last group of them have been working with us since August. So that is a huge change, is the business growing and being able to accommodate what was just a growing wait list that I was never going to be able to get to, and creating like this beautiful community of coaches, which, you know, doing this alone is not a lot of fun long term. So being able to have them to bounce off and meet with and, just share the, experience of being a coach with has been unreal. That's probably been my absolute highlight the last couple of years, is the business.
That is amazing. And I love so many of the coaches on your team. They're so talented, and you just picked some really good ones. So
I was really lucky. I had never gone out to intentionally recruit, and they would reach out to me, which is such a great sign, because they can see, like, they know what they want to do and they know what resonates with them philosophically. So they made the job so easy for me, because I was just like finding you on Instagram. You're like, I like her, I'm going to message her. If, they get in contact and I'm like, I think this is a good fit, then it's pretty much 90% of the way there.
That's really cool. Yeah, that was weird. I was like, in my head back then, I was hardly collaborating with people, or if I was, I would just reach out to them. So it was cool that you had reached out. But anyway, so fun that you have this expanding business, and we could talk about it all day, but let's dive in to eating disorder red flags. So how would you define an eating disorder red flag?
So I think the best way to first delineate what's a red flag versus what's an out and out obvious eating disorder symptom is the 2 words that in the training that really resonated with me are covert and overt. So we've got our overt behaviors, which are those behaviors that you tend to find more so in the DSM-5 when you're looking diagnostically at what an eating disorder is. You're not really going to find covert behaviors in there. You might find the covert behaviors showing up in more like contributors to eating disorders, but not necessarily things that we do. I think that the distinction is not helpful. If somebody came to me and they said, I don't have a single overt eating disorder behavior, I'm engaging in all covert eating disorder behaviors, I'd still give them as much attention and focus and help as somebody showing up with pretty much just overt behaviors. So overt behaviors are those more obvious, quote unquote, behaviors like restriction, purging, those kinds of behaviors, whereas covert might be things like, and we'll get into some of these, I'm sure, delaying your food or cutting out food groups, or maybe, chronic dieting, or trying to lose weight in anticipation of an event and feeling like you can't go if you don't. All these little things that make up the root system of an eating disorder. And my philosophy at Beyond Body is we don't just pull out the big root system, we pull out all the little root systems as well. And that's what we're more so talking about today, are those covert things that might seem really innocuous, but leave them hanging around and they can very quickly grow into something much bigger and stronger and harder to pull out.
Yes. And, when you're talking, I'm thinking about my own experience and how I had so many covert behaviors, or we call them even sabotaging behaviors, right? And then the thing is, my overt behaviors were the things that told me, you know what, you have a problem. There's something wrong here. I probably, if I didn't have overt behaviors happening, so I had bulimia, so there were some glaringly obvious overt behaviors going on. If I did not have that, I think I would have been a lot more confused and a lot more in denial of having an eating disorder for a much longer time, because diet culture will just kind of gaslight you into thinking like this is totally normal.
And I think that's why it's so important to make that distinction between common and normal. I say this all the time. I've been saying it for years. Just because something is common does not mean it's normal. Just because a lot of people are engaging in something like dieting, like restrained eating, like delaying their food, like cutting out food groups, that doesn't mean it's a normal style of eating. Normal doesn't necessarily mean that a lot of people are doing it, right? And the reason I really try to hammer that home with, my audience or my clients is because so many of my clients will say, as they would with you, Meg, but, my friends do this and my sister's doing that. And, but, other people do that in society, in the world. And I'm like, we're not aiming for everyone else's disordered. We're not doing all this work just so that we can end up being everybody else's brand of miserable. We're going to do this work so that we get to a point of freedom that unfortunately a lot of people are never going to be able to experience because they'll never be forced to do the work. And that's where the blessing of recovery can come in. I don't ask people to do the toxic positivity, rainbows and sunshine, tell yourself you're grateful for everything in recovery. If you're annoyed at recovery, be annoyed, have your moment. But there are huge gifts, and that's one of them, which is that we don't have to settle for believing that we are going to be happy all the way through to the end of our lives if we could just get into that gene size or lose that X number of pounds or whatever it might be. We all know people who will live their whole lives believing that, and they'll never be forced to look at, hang on, how true is that? How much of my time and energy and life am I pouring into this where it could be better off spent elsewhere?
You are so right. That is one of the greatest gifts of recovery is being forced to reckon with the damage that diet culture has done in your life and what your eating disorder has done, and having to excavate all of that up and completely heal your relationship with food. Like, I know so many folks who have been dieting their entire lives, being stuck in focusing on their body and the size of their body for decades. They never hit that point where it was diagnosed, or they never were educated enough to see it as an eating disorder. Maybe they couldn't accept it as an eating disorder. And so they're stuck in that mentality forever, almost settling for a lifestyle where these eating disorder red flags are riddled as almost a permanent fixture of your life.
And it's some of the most painful work that I see people go through is not necessarily the people like you're talking about, the people who have just kind of believed that this is what they should be doing, that engaging in these kind of dieting behaviors or exercise behaviors, that's what they should be doing. That's what everyone else is doing. They've been, especially people, I think, of our age group, like those kids who grew up in 80s, 90s, where we were just saturated in all this diet talk. It was very, very normal. There was no alternative. There were no, obvious anti-diet spaces. We didn't have any of this language. It was just normal. Like when I was a kid and I was in a larger body, at the age of 10, everyone's advice was, well, just change your body. As opposed to now where we'd be like, well, no, we need to really look at the attitudes that are telling a 10-year-old that they need to change their body, right? It's those people who I see going through a lot of pain and grief, separating themselves from that identity of, this is moral and good and right for me to be doing these disordered things. And you have to spend weeks with them, equipping them with the knowledge that they need to look at those environments that they grew up in and those beliefs that they've absorbed, to give them even permission to start challenging them. They're like, but I'm going to lose my morality, or I'm going to lose my personality or my identity, or I'm not going to belong the way that I used to. And you've really got to get into that work with them before you start moving any behavioral pieces around.
Yeah. It is an act of flipping their world upside down, essentially, to the folks who have been in that mindset for the entirety of their life, like from childhood and up, right? And so it is a deep unrooting that has to happen. And I can see how it would be really hard I know for firsthand and through my clients, like it is really hard to watch people kind of reckon with that at first. So When it comes to red flags, I'm very curious about your story. Did you ignore any red flags when you were slipping into your eating disorder? And at what point did you even have the ability to name it an eating disorder?
I really like this question because I've never really explored this before. So when I talk about having my eating disorder, I more so talk about like what I would say were like the diagnosable years, the years when like the really, really overt behaviors were at the forefront. But I think the groundwork of my eating disorder was there from before I can even form memory, based on my environment and what I was taught and how I was treated and, you know, my weird, quote unquote, weird behaviors around food and hiding food, sneaking food, hiding plates, being really fearful of being seen eating. So it was a really slow burn over pretty much my entire childhood and teenage years. But probably the most, when I kind of can see it all crystallizing and coming to the point where it was just about to take hold, it was so many things that we consider to be normal. Some of them that I referenced before. I was big on if there's something coming up, like a birthday party or an event or even something at school, I would put this pressure on myself to look a certain way by the time that came around. And if I didn't get to my goal, then I wasn't allowed to go. How often do we hear about that, right? Where it's like there's a wedding coming up or there's a birthday coming up or they're going to a holiday or whatever. And it's this, you know, reward system that we're setting up. And then throughout that process of trying to get to that outcome, I would absolutely isolate myself. I would not engage with other people. My schoolwork was horrendous, even though I was already a terrible student, not good with authority figures. Big surprise. So that would get even worse.
Love that about you. I did not know that you were a terrible student. That is so refreshing in the recovery space.
It was always like, you know, she's got so much potential. If she just applied herself and didn't just spend the whole lesson arguing with the teacher about stupid stuff that doesn't really matter, she'd actually do quite well. So, yeah, things like, you know, setting up events as like this target and this goal, the preoccupation that would take hold of me around those times. And it's like with summer approaching, summer is a big one for people, sort of that anxiety that they get in anticipation of that time and, you know, trying to use that as some kind of motivation to change themselves. Definitely my sense of self was a big red flag. My self-talk was probably the biggest red flag and the one that was the most dangerous because, as we talked about in the last episode I was on, my biggest area of vulnerability was my mental health. That's how I almost lost my life to an eating disorder. So my self-talk, how incredibly punitive my self-talk was, how judgmental it was. I always give this example, like I could be walking down the street and you know when you just like lightly scuff the bottom of your shoe and you jolt a little bit because of the friction with the concrete? Yeah. I would do that and my body would jolt slightly and I would beat myself up about that for like 48 hours. It would not leave my mind. And I would tell myself I was an idiot, that I looked like an idiot, that people were judging me. The overestimation of what people were thinking of me and how they were thinking of me was a really big red flag. And that just got more and more intense until it was just all consuming. And all I could do was try to change myself to try to stop myself from making those assumptions about how people were seeing me or thinking about me. Delaying food was actually a huge one for me, which then leads into like all the rules that get set up around that, right? Yeah. Trying to put off food, trying to schedule food, trying to come up with like a timetable around when I could eat food that was absolutely not driven by my hunger or my cravings or anything like that. And if I could go back to the day when I learned what calories were, I would go back in time and like slam that computer shut on myself, because once I knew what calories were, my brain became a sponge for any rule or any measuring implement that I could pick up on. So my obsession with finding out about all these like measurements and calories, and I remember seeing this stupid article in a magazine where they were getting, and of course it was a women's magazine, where their advice was how to measure calories by, and this is going to sound insane, stationery. So if you could get like a Post-it and you could cover it with like a certain amount of almonds or a certain amount of chocolate, it would equal this amount of calories. And my brain went, oh, that's really helpful because when I'm at work, I can just do that. And then, so it was like opening up Pandora's box. I then became obsessed with if there was a way that I could measure, if there was a way that I could count or whatever it might be, it went in as a rule and something that I had to follow. And that was all well before I was using behaviors. It just it appealed to my brain so much to have these formulas and this mathematics, which is ironic because it was my worst subject at school. And so I think sometimes like that appeal and even having that desire to go looking for that information and go down that rabbit hole and how your brain like kicks in and goes, oh, I love this. Huge, huge red flags. If I look back on it, looked innocent, absolutely was like the undercurrent of so many of my future behaviors.
Hey guys, it's officially that fun time of year when we are enrolling new members into the Recovery Collective. So now is your time to finally join me and Claire and so many other recovery warriors like you inside a community that offers you so much opportunity for connection and support. Curious to know what it's like inside? Here's what our current members are saying about the collective.
My favorite part about the Recovery Collective is that as of joining about a year ago, I finally realized how important it is to have a community in recovery.
It was definitely a turning point for me to finally talk to someone who's understanding.
The people in the Recovery Collective are some of the most lovely, supportive people I've ever met.
If you're thinking about joining the Recovery Collective, I have 2 words to say to you. Do it. Literally just give it a chance. I think you will be surprised in the most wonderful way.
Make the jump and join. It's honestly one of the best things I ever did, and I've made some of my best friends from around the world.
It's a safe place for me. I know I can say anything and never get judged for it. And I feel that we all truly care about each other.
Well, there you have it. Our members have spoken. And I might be a little biased, but I think our community is pretty great too. For more information, check out the link in the show notes and make sure you sign up for the waiting list so you can be the first to join our community on May 18th. Wow. Oh my gosh. And this is all before you're even diagnosed with an eating disorder. But if you and I had someone come to us reporting all of these behaviors, we would happily take them on as a client. No questions asked.
Even if somebody came to me, because another big one for me was comparison. Like I couldn't be in a room without trying to figure out where I fit amongst the bodies in the room. And not so much to externally judge anyone. It was more so, how am I meant to feel about myself in this room?
Yeah.
And the fact that my brain would go looking for bodies that made me feel bad about myself. Like I had this cognitive bias and that's what I would go looking for. And I would go and find all the bodies that back that up to make me feel bad. So I could then use that for motivation to, keep hurting myself, right? So even if somebody came to me just with that, like I cannot stop comparing myself to other people's bodies. I'm always trying to figure out how to feel about my own body. I'd be like, we definitely have something to talk about. They could have 0 overt behaviors. And that alone, I would be like, that could use some attention for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So thinking back to your story, you are doing all of these things. You're obsessed with calories. You're trying to lose weight for events, all the things. What is the story you're telling yourself to make this permissible?
Everybody else is doing it. Not only that, I think this is what can make it so painful for people to unpack when it is everybody else is doing it. It's, moral, it's right. It's, how I belong. It's how I make myself acceptable. That's absolutely what I was taught and told from a very young age. This is your obligation to make your body a certain way, to do certain things, to avoid the judgment and criticism of you experienced in childhood. The only way to avoid that is to, make sure that you're making yourself appear in a way that isn't going to bring that judgment and criticism. So that's what I was telling myself, is that I'm doing the right thing. It might be really hard for me to do. It might be really painful for me to do. But because of my childhood experience of being bullied at school, having my parents even tell me I needed to change my body, that was absolutely me protecting myself and trying to keep myself safe. By hurting myself, by punishing myself, not knowing there was an alternative. And I think that's what we really have to acknowledge when we get into this work with people, and why it's so important as coaches to be like, and who's your therapist? Because we start digging into these behavioral things, and very quickly we get to, well, in my case, I was trying to avoid being rejected by my parents. I was trying to avoid being rejected by my peers. That's identity stuff. That's sense of self stuff. So the story I told myself wasn't, I'm trying to be perfect, or I am just trying to avoid being worth nothing, which is, if I didn't maintain that, I was worth nothing. And even the people who cared about me and loved me the most would not be able to accept me. And that is too painful to look at, especially as a kid and a teenager.
Right. Yes. I think when I was going through my eating disorder, it came down to my self-worth as well. And feeling like my worth was completely connected to the size of my body and how healthy I was eating and how perfect I was on the outside. So I completely relate to that, which is why therapy was so important. And I still go to therapy for
Me too.
so many reasons. Yeah. So it's like, oh man, I'm just so grateful that you can kind of be so open with everyone in sharing kind of how things were looking for you and how your eating disorder evolved. And if you had gotten help at that point, how do you think your recovery would have been different? Because from what I hear in your story, things got much worse before you went and got help.
Oh, yeah. And that's the problem with these covert red flag behaviors, is that you don't get to decide how and when they're going to exacerbate into something much bigger, or how, things are going to deteriorate over time. You don't even know if you're going to be that person, right? It's, as we know, it's a perfect storm of how we all end up in that situation. But even if you don't, I try to impress upon my clients, somebody can be dieting their whole life and never end up with a diagnosable eating disorder and to be just as miserable as we are. So that's why it's so important to address it, because I think we really could prevent people from getting to the worse and worse stages they do get to if we were more conscious of paying attention to these red flags and treating these red flags and letting people know it's not just important to address these red flags early on, but you are just as valid at this stage as if you ended up with something that was more in that DSM-5. I really, when it comes to prevention, and as much as we, need to get more funding and awareness around treatment, prevention is so important as well. And this is one of the ways we can do it, normalizing, getting people to go and address this before it turns into something that is just clinically much more dangerous than it needs to be. Yeah. So I think that could have been the outcome for me. If I had come across somebody who could speak the language that made sense to me. It's like when I first went into recovery, I read The Beauty Myth by Naomi Wolf, which is a bit outdated now. I wish she would update it. But for my generation, it really helped me to look at how I'd been conditioned and go, I am angry. I can't believe that I was never given this insight into how wrong it was to be raised in that environment and to have no alternative presented to me. So if I'd come across somebody, I absolutely would have resonated with someone helping me to look at my beliefs, my sense of self, my environment, and question it. I absolutely could have prevented ending up where I ended up, which is hopefully part of the work that we're now able to do, is intervening and making it okay for people to intervene, not waiting to be sick enough, no such thing, to go and get that help, to do it ASAP.
I was just going to bring up that mentality of it's like the mentality that people get stuck in that blocks them from recovering is, I'm not sick enough. And that's because of the stereotypes we see in the media of, I have to be super emaciated before I can go to treatment, or I have to go to the lowest of lows before I'm ready to take help, make a change. And, that does not have to be you. And you are sick enough, especially if you're even questioning it. Right. And I think, for engaging in any of these red flags, you are sick enough to get the support you need. And, the sooner you get help for your mental health, the better the outcome, essentially.
And that's a red flag in and of itself, which is, I used to, in the early days of my career, I used to get into the weeds with people about, well, I'm not sick enough, Mia. And I'd show them all the qualifiers that they were sick enough. And then I just got to the point where I was like, the biggest sick enough red flag is that you're telling yourself that you're not sick enough. That's going to be one of your earliest red flags that there's something to address, is you telling yourself it's not that bad. I won't get help until I reach there, or I'm not as sick as that person. And therefore, as I said, the reason that is so harmful for people to be looking for behavioral red flags that are bad enough, quote unquote, or like markers. I never had any physical markers. I had rosacea, like the most painful, extreme version of a skin condition on my face. I had all of these other terrible symptoms, especially my mental health. I never got back a blood test which said, oh, warning sign, this really needs attention. I never had an ECG that returned something that was really, really worrying. I still almost lost my life. And when we look at how people lost to eating disorders, one of the leading ways is suicide. So if we're all sitting around waiting for big red flags and big markers, we're losing so much time and so many people because of that framework. So if you are speaking to yourself in a way that is punitive or unkind or cruel, that's a huge marker. That's the most important marker I'm looking for, is how are you talking to yourself? I don't care what your bloods say. I care about what is it like to be in the universe that is your brain every day.
I think that is extremely valuable, just as far as what to look for. Because when I think about a marker of recovery, I'm thinking about what's your brain like now? Like, is the food obsession gone? Is the preoccupation with food gone? Are you no longer counting calories and like having these emotional outbursts when someone offers you a cookie? Like, that's a huge gauge of healing, in my opinion, as well.
Yeah. And it's, you know what, if we could give ourselves a big pat on the back for all of our recovered clients, because all we were measuring was, like, I have a traffic light food system where we, section off their foods into anxiety levels. So like red foods are the big fear foods, high anxiety, orange is mid-range anxiety, green is low to no anxiety. And over time, we like get them all down into green. That's the goal, right?
Yep.
If I just did that and they went, oh, I'm not using behaviors. And I went, I've done my whole job. That's my whole job done. But if they said to me, but I still talk to myself about what a worthless piece of crap I am, or, like I don't deserve love, or, I can't leave the house, then I haven't done my job, because this stuff isn't just about food and body. A lot of this stuff comes from sense of self-talk, belief about who you are and what your value is. That's where the real ongoing work is that keeps people well. Food gets them well, the inner work keeps them well. So that's why, as far as, the areas to pay attention to, that's where my interest is. It's great to get them to do all the practical stuff, but if that's not shifting the internal conversation they're having with themselves, then the work is not done yet.
And I think for me, if we're going back to the conversation of gifts of recovery, my inner voice became a friend. It became someone who had my back. And it gets me through life to this day. If I make a mistake, I have my own back. I'm not beating myself up. And, I'm also not talking to myself like, oh, it's okay, little baby.
Yeah.
I always have to point that out. Like, self-talk doesn't have to be like a sweet.
I'm the best little precious flower in the field and I never do anything wrong.
Right. It sounds like my self-talk transformed into a friend. Yes. And that is a major indicator of healing, at least in my life.
I think it's a great way to put it, because I think that people can be like, but I don't like myself. And I'm like, well, I try to be the friend to myself that I am to other people. Like, I am the friend who, can I swear? Like, really swear? Can I drop an
You can
F-bomb?
swear.
Okay. Like if my friends fuck up, I won't judge them, but I'm not going to enable them either. I'm not going to be like, you did nothing wrong. And it's okay that, I don't know, like cheated on your partner or whatever. That's a random example. None of my friends have done that, but I wouldn't be like, oh, and that's okay. I'd be like, why did that happen? And what can we learn from it? And you have my absolute sympathy that this is an awful time, but I'm not also going to say, oh, and you don't need to like look at any of your decisions.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's the thing. It's like, I think self-talk, like positive self-talk turns people off when they have this idea that it's going to be this cutesy little hand-holding enabler, right? It's not like that. It's like, you have your own back. That's always what I say. You're your own friend, and you are going to still have those like check-ins, like you said. You're not going to tell your friend who cheated on their significant other that everything's okay, and that
they're making great decisions, and because what's going to happen to them, right? And if you really love them and care about them, you want the best outcomes for them, and that means when they do screw up, that you're going to be honest with them, right? So that they can get to better outcomes. It's kind of like the best example I can give of how your relationship with self evolves is it's so much of what we do, which is like the truth without judgment, meeting people where they are. Like if I'm going to bed and I've, made a real mess in the kitchen, I'll be like, okay, I'm going to rinse all of this, but I don't have an early start tomorrow. I'll make sure it's rinsed and I'll clean it up in the morning. And then a voice in my head on a day when I do have an early start the next day might go, come on, Mia, like you've got an early start tomorrow. Mia tomorrow morning's going to wake up and have to do all these dishes and then jump on this and do that. Okay, yeah, no, you're right. Okay, yeah, I'll do them tonight. So it's meeting yourself where you are. It's being flexible. It's giving yourself a bit of tough love when you need it and giving yourself validation where you need it as well. It's not, as you say, just all hand holding, and we'd all become sociopaths if that's what we were teaching people, right? You're never responsible for anything and it's never your fault. Like that's not how to teach people to be
that's not healthy
whole
either.
people.
Yeah, that's not healthy either. So I'm loving hearing kind of how we've both transformed, right? And the indicators of healing. Are there any examples of eating disorder red flags that you want to highlight? Because I'm sure there are many out there that you haven't really like dug deep into yet.
So one that we touched on before that I think is a really important one because I see it quite a lot is our emotional response to food. A key way to highlight this, it doesn't just have to be this way, but a key way to highlight this is if somebody offers you food or there's like a last minute change to what you're going to be having or where you're going to be going, like a restaurant change or whatever it might be. And if you have a pretty strong reaction, that can be an indicator that there's something going on because that's one of the most obvious disruptors to our rules and our patterns and our rigidities, right? Best example I can give of this is, and it is always drawn to my attention when somebody, like a girlfriend comes over and she's like, oh, I bought you some flowers and I bought you this and I bought you some chocolate, right? Now that is just a lovely gesture. I'm like, oh my God, that's great. Can't wait to, crack into that tonight. Whereas before that would have been, I would have responded in a way internally that was angry, frustrated. I might have even felt sabotaged. I would have got paranoid about it. Like, why are they buying me chocolate? What are they trying to do? They know that I don't eat chocolate and, they're trying to, and, they don't care about me because they're not trying to support my goals and da-da-da-da-da. Or if I was asked on a date or something and they'd organised the booking at the restaurant and then I'd get a text that day being like, oh, actually, that place, I just remembered, like their food isn't that great, so I booked somewhere else. I would cancel the date because I would have been planning around that restaurant or around that food and would have like checked menus and made sure what I was selecting could fit into all my rules and rigidities. And I would respond again with anger, frustration, paranoia, feeling sabotaged. So I think any strong emotional response to food, especially when it's something that's outside of your control, is a huge red flag because we can just brainwash ourselves into our own rules and be like, this is just what I do. This is just what I have every day and the timeline. But when our external world comes in and disrupts that, that's a real indicator that we are living incredibly rigidly, that we have pretty much lost all ability to be flexible, to be spontaneous, to, let food be an accompaniment to our life versus like the driver and director of our life. So that's a huge one. I also think another one that was quite present for me and that I see showing up for clients is within movement as well. I think movement can be a really great area for people because it is sold as movement is great, movement is good for you, movement makes you feel good. And so that blurs the lines for people when they're like, well, Mia, why would I stop doing this when it makes me feel good? And I'm like, what part of you feels good? Let's figure that out first, right? If you want a relationship with movement, then great. I can help you do that where it's safe and where it's like medically signed off, right? I can help you do that. But let's make sure that in 10, 20 years' time, when you're going hiking with your friends, that you're doing it for the right reason. You don't have to sit and go, oh, I never challenged this. Is this actually what I want to be doing? And because it is packaged as it's just a positive, it's just a good thing, I think that relationship with movement being snatched away from healthy self to eating disorder self can be so insidious and so hard to pick up on, which is why I get people in my work with them to do movement logs where they're doing 3 check-ins. They're checking in with themselves and how they're talking to themselves about why they're going to move before they go, like what's a thought or a feeling before you engage in movement that you can pick up on. They then do that halfway through, and then they do that about 5 to 10 minutes after they stopped engaging in movement. And then the final thing I get them to do is give it an enjoyment rating. How much did you enjoy that movement? And 10 is synonymous with the best, most relaxing holiday you've ever been on. So if they're going to give it a 9, they've got to justify to me why it's a 9. And very quickly we start to see those enjoyment levels of like always below 5. Then it's never actually that enjoyable. So once we can see how does it feel to enjoy movement from healthy self, how does it feel to enjoy movement from eating disorder self, it's much easier to see those movement red flags. I didn't go far enough, long enough. I have to go because I ate this or that, or because I've got this on this weekend, or no, I can't stop for 10 minutes to enjoy the view. I have to keep going. All those little red flags within movement that are really hard to pick up on because it's very easy to convince ourselves it's giving me endorphins. It feels good. I'm moving my body. Everyone says that's good for you. So movement is one of the ones where it's hardest to get people to see those red flags for what they are.
I'm so glad you pointed that out because that one is so insidious and it is the most hijacked by diet culture, I think, out there. And because it's not directly like food related, it can be forgotten about in these conversations, but it's completely a huge red flag if you're not enjoying it or it's rigid or you're forcing yourself. I remember movement could feel like I had a drill sergeant, like just cracking the whip, and so that is a really great example.
And here's one of the biggest signs it might be a red flag for you, because if you talk to recovered people, very often there's a kind of movement they engaged in their eating disorder that they don't do anymore. Like for me, it was running. I thought I was a runner. I was like, I'm a runner. Like that's 90% of my identity. It's pretty much how I introduce myself. Running everywhere, letting people know I'm a runner. I hate running. I gave it up so quickly in my recovery. And you hear that a lot when people are like, oh, I did this or I did that. And yes, I still engage in movement, but I would never do that again. That's one of the biggest indicators that it's something for everyone to look at is most recovered people are going to be like, I don't engage in movement the way I used to. And I actually enjoy it now.
Yeah. I'm not a runner either. I definitely ran a lot when I was sick. And now I'm like, there are much more enjoyable ways for me to move. But I cannot believe how fast the time has gone by.
I know. I'm sorry, I ramble.
You could ramble as long as you want. I'm just trying to keep us on schedule for our days today. But I am so grateful for everything you shared today, from your personal experiences to the work you do with clients and all of the red flags. I think this could be a potentially life-saving interview for someone to hear, because anyone listening, if you are connecting to these red flags and if these are things that are happening to you in your life, there should be nothing holding you back from getting the help you need now. You have 2 professionals telling you now is the time. So keep that in mind as you move forward into your days. And Mia, I just want to say thank you. You are a light in my life. I wish we could talk more often. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate you so much.
always back the same way. I mean, obviously, I was stalking you on Instagram years ago. So thanks for refreshing my memory. But yeah, I feel very lucky to have you in my life as well and to be connected in the way that we are in this space. It's not the easiest job. It's not the easiest space to be in. It is incredibly rewarding and amazing. And, there's so many parts of it that make community so important. And I'm so glad that you're part of mine.
Well, the feeling is mutual. And the stalking was mutual. So I'm glad we mutually stalked each other back in the day. And I will be seeing you very soon, at least virtually, and hopefully one day in person. Thank you, Mia, for today.
My pleasure. Talk soon.
Talk soon. Well, there you have it. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode of the show. I wanted to remind all of you that the Recovery Collective is now open and accepting new members until June 1st. If you are feeling stuck in recovery and haven't joined the Recovery Collective yet, joining this community might be exactly what you need to add fresh energy and connection and motivation into your treatment plan. In fact, community will increase your chances of recovery altogether. So go check out recoverycollective.mykajabi.com to gain community access today. We would love to see you inside the Recovery Collective.